Spring has sprung, guys, and with it, so has our reading. Welcome to my TED Talk. So I've been wanting to do this video for a while now, and that is my spring recommendations. I try to do a different recommendations video every single season based on books that I have read previously that I think kind of give that feeling or that vibe of that season, whatever it may be. And I have to say spring is probably the hardest month for me personally to give recommendations on, mainly because I feel like the season itself is very confusing and complex. When you think of summer, you think of the beach, you think of sunny weather, you think of just travel and hot weather. When you think of winter, you just think snow, cold, Christmas. And then you think of fall and you think of, pumpkins, you think the leaves changing colors, you think of it starting to get cooler. And then there's spring. The best way I can describe it is a roller coaster of weather. You're slowly getting out of winter and it feels like it's not technically the end of winter yet. Then it's like raining constantly, or there's tornadoes and storms. Plants, trees are turning green again. Flowers, you're finally buying flowers and planting flowers. But at the same time, it's like, is winter actually over? And then all of a sudden it's summer. It feels like summer just kind of like is thrown at you and it's all of a sudden like scorchingly hot. So that's why I have very weird mixed feelings about spring. It's also when my birthday is, which is exciting. But at the same time, just the feeling of spring, I don't know. I tried to pick out a selection of books. Some are romances, some are fantasies, some are sci-fi, some are mystery thrillers that all give me kind of a spring feeling or spring vibe. And I'm going to try to explain why to the best of my ability. There's a few of these that I just, for whatever reason, like it doesn't take place in the spring or have anything to do with spring. But when I think of this book, it makes me want to read it in spring. I'm going to try my best to explain. Let's go ahead and start talking about them. First up, I want to talk about some of the romances that I would recommend for the springtime. The first one I'm going to talk about is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I actually just recently read this and I love this book so much. It follows our main character Daphne, who was just recently broken up with by her fiance, like weeks before their wedding. He dumps her for his childhood best friend, who's a girl. The girl who he said, you don't have to worry about her. There's nothing there. She's just a friend. But with nowhere to go, she literally gets kicked out of their house. She goes to Miles. That is the girl best friend's boyfriend who she broke up with to be with her now ex-fiance. Both were recently dumped, so they think, why not? Let's be roommates. And it kind of goes from there. It starts with them grieving and like being roommates for about a month. And I think this story actually starts in the spring, like the beginning of spring. But that's not even why I would recommend it for the springtime. I think this book, it talks a lot about growth, self-discovery, finding yourself when you're not in a relationship. So being single and finding what makes you happy, finding your people who actually care about you. This is just such a powerful story. I think anybody could read it and enjoy it. And it's very humorous as well. They go on a lot of fun adventures together. They do a lot of like outdoor activities together. Kind of reminds me of spring as well. Just finally feeling like I can venture outside without freezing my butt off. Exploring new things and new hobbies. Next up, we have 40 Year Kiss. I listened to this as an audiobook this past month and I really enjoyed it. It kind of took me by surprise how much I liked it, but it follows our main character who I think he's like in his 60s and he is going on a first date with his ex-wife, which sounds really funny when I say that out loud, but him and his ex-wife were married for a few years back when they were in their 20s and it was very much young love, whirlwind romance. They crashed and they burned and there was just a lot of things that they didn't know about each other before they got married. So now it's decades later. They're finally kind of rekindling that love that they had for each other. And it's just a really sweet story. You get to see how they have matured and grown apart and also how they mature and grow together as a couple once again. I don't know what about that screams spring to me. The cover looks like a sunset, which is beautiful. Highly recommend getting a physical copy of this book because also the sprayed edges match the sunset and it's so incredibly pretty. This book is just like starting over. You're starting over and it's never too late to try new things or to find love or rekindle old love. And I think it's just really beautiful. So highly recommend this book for literally any age. Next, we have Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. This is a book that I actually read in the fall time and I know it got a lot of bad reviews when people read it. I think it was very overhyped before it was released. It was highly anticipated by a lot of people, myself included. When it first was released, I think it came out in the summertime of this past year. A lot of people read it and were disappointed with it, mainly because I feel like they read it in the wrong season. season. Just stick with me here. This story follows our main character who every single year, her and some of her friends who are, I think, in their own like little book club, go on this like reading retreat. So they'll rent an Airbnb, travel there, and they just spend like a long weekend at a cabin and just read and hang out together. Honestly, goals. I kind of want to do this myself. And this year, all of her book club friends can't make it. So she decides to go by herself. She's like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to go because I still want to go on this retreat. She packs up her car and drive up into these mountains to get to this Airbnb or this cabin. And on her way, she makes a wrong turn and she ends up in her all-time favorite romance book's hometown. So she ends up literally in the story, her all-time favorite romance book, and she's meeting all of her favorite characters. The author of the series has passed away, and this is like her final book, and she's basically helping write the ending of her favorite series. It's gonna feel very atmospheric when you are reading this story, and I think that's why you have to pick the right season to read it. I think fall or spring, those like transitional seasons where it's like a mix of warm and cold, I think those are the perfect times to read this book. I read it in the fall and I really enjoyed it, but I also think reading it in the spring would be kind of great because when I think back on this book, it honestly felt like a warm hug and it was so atmospheric and I felt very immersed in the setting of this book. This story in this town also reminded me a lot of just flowers and nature, which I don't know if at any point it actually talks about it. I mean, she's like walking through town and she's describing it, so maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I don't know. It's a very complex feeling, and I think that kind of fits in with the spring season. And the final romance book I'm going to talk about is Ready or Not. Looking at the cover, it screams spring. This story follows our main character who ends up getting pregnant after a one-night stand with a bartender. She is kind of going through a lot of thoughts and feelings and just emotions. She's trying to figure out, is this the right choice for her? Can she crack motherhood? Also trying to figure out if the father of the baby is going to be involved. Since it follows her during this pregnancy, obviously, it doesn't just happen during spring. This book takes place majority of the year, so you will see pretty much all of the seasons in this book. But I feel like for the most part, it reminds me of spring because it's just new beginnings and she's creating a new life for herself, like not the life that she envisioned for herself, but she's kind of figuring that out along the way through trial and error. At the same time, her best friend's, I think, older brother is there for her and supporting her, and you can see like a little bit of a romance blooming there as well, and it's just a very beautiful story. Next, we're going to talk about some fantasy books that I think would be great for the springtime. The first one, I feel like I've recommended this book in other seasons, but I still think it'd be great even in the spring. It honestly works in every season, and that is Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. There's only 2 books out at the moment. They have released the cover for the 3rd one, and I'm really excited. This is literally a Disney movie come to life. It follows our main character who is running through the woods, and she stumbles across this villain who is, I think either he's injured or she's injured, and the Kingsguard are basically chasing him, and since she's there, she kind of gets caught up in it, and he ends up offering her a job. It's such a funny and quirky book, and it just feels nostalgic in the best way possible. I think anybody could enjoy it if you love Disney, or if you were a Disney kid growing up. This is the perfect book to read, and I think just in the springtime, I feel like I'm very nostalgic in the spring. The next fantasy book I'm going to recommend is Grave Empire, which this is a surprising choice for me. I actually read this past month for a book club, and it was definitely more of like a traditional fantasy. Usually I read more romantasy, like there's a high amount of romance within the plot, but this one is mainly just fantasy. Basically in this world, you're following 3 different perspectives. They're all in different parts of the world, and there's basically this plague that has descended upon this world. People are going missing and no one knows what is going on, and they are kind of all 3 trying to figure it out in their own ways. You get to see how their paths intertwine throughout the story. It was definitely a world that felt very ominous. When I think of the weather in spring, it makes me think of like foggy weather. Like it's just very hazy and like hard to see and mysterious. And that's kind of the vibe I get from this fantasy, this world, this setting we're in. Each of them has their own paths, their own missions that they're trying to accomplish. It is a denser read, but when I read it, if I had to pick a season for this fantasy, it would be spring. And I definitely think it all comes from the vibes. Like there's no good reason why I think it would work in the spring. It's just the feeling I got when I read it. The next book I'm going to talk about is the only sci-fi novel that I can think of that reminds me of spring, and that is The Girl Who Can Move Stuff with Her Mind. This is definitely more of like a superhero feeling type world. Our main character, she has like telekinetic powers. She can move things, obviously based on the title, but she works for this government group. However, a person gets murdered, and they get murdered in a way that only someone with her powers could have done. And to her knowledge and everyone else's knowledge, she is the only person with these powers. She's the only person with powers, period. So she immediately becomes the prime suspect. It's a very fast-paced page turner. It takes place over 24 hours, I believe. And this whole time she's trying to prove her innocence. This was a very fun ride. It was very refreshing humor as well. It was very sarcastic and dry. And she was just so fun to follow along from her perspective and also this world that we're in. It's literally just like modern day. And you throw in a superhero who's just very inexperienced. The final recommendation that I have for this video, it is a mystery thriller, and that is Wrong Place, Wrong Time. I read this past fall in like a mystery thriller vlog, and I really, really enjoyed this book. It kind of took me by surprise how much I enjoyed it. Our main character, she is a mom, and one night her son is walking home and she sees him out on the street, and all of a sudden this man approaches her son, and her son proceeds to stab this man. After that, her life just kind of comes to a standstill. She goes to bed that night, wakes up the next morning, and it's the day before. Every single day she goes to bed, she wakes up the day before. So it's kind of like a reverse time travel loop thing that she's in. She keeps waking up previous days before, but every single day she wakes up, she learns something new, or she observes something new that kind of helps her piece together what went wrong. Why did her son do this? The reason why it makes me think of Spring, I think it's just because our main character, when you're reading from her perspective as a mom, she's just like reevaluating her life. Each day she goes back in time, she's reevaluating the choices that she made and things that she said to her son or to her husband or to the people around her, that all these different things, how they added up to what happened in present day. It's very mysterious. It's not like super thrilling, but it's very mysterious. There's no gore involved. As I say, the son stabs a man. It definitely was mysterious enough to where I wanted to keep reading because I wanted to untangle what actually happened at the end. And that is it for my spring recommendations. This was a harder video for me to film, mainly because I feel like it's just really hard to come up with good spring recommendations. But I personally love spring. I really, really do enjoy spring. It's actually starting to be really beautiful outside, and I cannot wait to just do more things outside, period. I am going to be releasing my spring TBR video next, and I'm so incredibly excited because I'm going to try to do something a little bit different with my spring TBR video. I'm still doing it like a seasonal TBR. I'm not going to do a monthly one just because I don't like to put myself in such a small box. I like to give myself months to read certain books based on when the mood hits, I guess. But I'm going to try something slightly different. I don't know. I had a little idea for it. I don't know if it's like creative. It probably isn't. Actually, it's not creative, but it's different for me. So we'll see if it works out in the next video. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this gave you some recommendations or some books to put on your radar for this upcoming season if you're like me and you're a mood reader. Also, this is all opinion based, so clearly some of these books you might have read and been like, that fits in winter, or no, that fits in fall. Agreed. But I do think that books can fit in multiple months. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.